Hello, this is Luke Turner, and I'm back with another episode of Building an Exercise Tracking Web App from Scratch. So, to get started today, we're going to do the usual steps. Run the database, run the client-side code bundler, open up a new tab, and run the server. So, we can wait for that to finish running, and then we can open up the app in our browser. And here we are. I've been thinking a little bit before the stream today about what I want to work on. The app's kind of in an interesting place right now. We have our Today page, which works well enough. We have our Manage Exercises page, which also works all right, and it doesn't look too bad either. There is a page for viewing the historical data, and there's a page for editing exercises. And we have a settings page, and I got logged out for some reason. We have a settings page, which currently just has units in there, but it also has a decent form UI, nothing too ugly. At this point, this is something where, if this was like an internal application where only people in the company would be using it, or like a personal app, it's getting to the point where it might be considered done. Or to put it another way, it wouldn't be worth the energy, the time to invest to make it any better because most of the value has been delivered. But if we want to make this something that people are actually going to want to use online, something where it's competing with all the other exercise tracking apps out there, it's missing a certain je ne sais quoi, in my opinion. And what do I mean by that? Well, picture like if you're a woodworker making a box, right? And you're just making it to hold screws or something in your shop. You might just take some pieces of plywood or some basic chunks of wood you have lying around, glue them together into a box shape, put a lid on it with a hinge, and you're pretty much done. But what if you're making a box that you want to share with others, that you want to be an example of good work? All of a sudden, maybe you don't just want to glue it. Maybe you want to properly join the edges. Maybe you want to polish the outside of the box. You want to sand off the corners so that people don't hurt themselves. You want to put felt on the inside, whatever. You want to use 2 hinges on the lid, all these different things that give that box that je ne sais quoi, that quality. And so for an app like this, because it is just a hobby app, I'm not going to go too far into making like a perfect quality. I also, admittedly feel like I'm not very good at that. It's not my area of expertise. But I do feel like we can make some progress in that direction. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing today. Let's look back at our code. We have this notes file. And I haven't really shown this on stream, but I've been kind of maintaining it as we go along. This decent design and consistent UI patterns, I'm actually going to check off at this point. Is it an excellent design? Not yet, but it's decent. We're using the correct Bulma conventions in all of our pages. Another thing we need to add is exporting and deleting data. And then there's a lot of things here, both in this next actions list and in this ideas list, that can kind of help us add some of that quality to our app. So one of the places that I kind of want to start here is with this exporting and deleting data, right? It's here under what we need to do to ship. That means it's important. We should be paying attention to that. So let's take a look at what that would involve. Under the views page, we're going to be putting this in our settings, right? So if we look at the settings page here, we're going to want a section where the user can export data, And then also a kind of a danger zone section, sort of similar to the manage exercises page. We're going to want a danger zone where the user can delete their data and their whole account. So let's start with the deleting. If we look at the exercise edit page here, I'm just going to kind of copy this modal bit. We certainly are going to want a confirmation dialog. And I'm also going to copy the actual delete exercise chunk here, because we're going to be using a similar pattern in our settings page. And then this will not be indented under the form, right? And so this would be delete my account. And let's just see what that looks like for the moment. Settings. Okay, got some signals to update here, down here. Let's just comment this out for the moment. Okay, so we've got this danger zone, delete my account button. And maybe I'll just call this delete, so it's not so redundant. Delete my account, delete. And then when the user clicks that, it's going to pop up this modal. So let's kind of take a look at what we need to do here. So this is going to be delete my account. Are you sure you want to delete this account and all data associated with it? This cannot be undone. And then this is going to be a form delete account. The actual name here is not that important. We could even continue to call it delete exercise. It just has to match between here and here. But for semantic reasons, we're going to call it delete account. That's what it actually is. And then we're going to need to call a route here. And this is, what exactly this route is doesn't really matter all that much. Because there's a logged in user, normally if you were to create a route that's performing an operation on a resource, like a user, you would do something like this, delete user 123. But this delete account route will only ever be called by the user on their own account. If we had like an admin dashboard where somebody with special permissions could delete anybody's account, we would need a route with the ID as a parameter. But we're not planning on implementing that. So instead, it's just going to be delete me, basically. Delete this user. And so if I save that, let's take a look at what the UI is doing now. Open the network tab. If I go delete my account, we get a pop-up. Are you sure you want to delete it? If I click cancel, or I click the X, nothing happens. If I click delete, then the browser is redirected to this delete page. But because we haven't implemented the router for it, we get a 404. It's time to do that now. Okay, so what does that involve? Let's go to the index page. This is where we have all of our controller methods defined. And we're going to add a new one here. This is interesting. All I did was copy and paste, but it's taking its sweet time about it. Okie doke, here we go. And this is going to be /user/delete. And what are we going to do? We're going to db.delete from user table, where equals user table.id, user.id. And then we're going to redirect the user to the home page because they're no longer going to be able to log in. And, there's no other page we could really redirect them to except basically the main homepage. So this is kind of a naive implementation, right? We're deleting the user. If we have our foreign keys set up properly, this should also delete any column or any row, in any other table that has a foreign key reference to this user if we have on cascade delete set for all of those. So let's just take a look at the model for a moment. The database schema. So we have our exercise table, and each exercise references a user with on-delete cascade. Our sets table also references a user with on-delete cascade. Our user table obviously is just going to be deleted. The session references the user, and on-delete cascade is not explicitly set. It's unclear whether that's going to be cascade deleted or not. And account also references a user. That's also unclear if that's going to be cascade deleted or not. Both session and account, in this case, by the way, are being generated by BetterAuth. The BetterAuth library generated these tables. So these weren't tables that we wrote ourselves. And verification, I believe that's for email address verification, which we don't even use in the first place because we're using a OAuth provider login only. But if we were to have verification, it doesn't appear to have any association with the user. So in theory, you could end up with, I was going to say you could end up with some orphan verification things, but these are probably actually deleted once the user is properly verified. And so there should never be any verification rows associated with an account if the user is already logged in. So let's actually take a look at our schema with Table Plus here and see for this account and session tables whether they have that foreign key constraint set up or not. Or, the on-delete cascade element of the foreign key constraint, I should say. So I think I can do open structure. And we can see user ID, foreign key. So we can see on update, no action, on delete, no action. So we kind of have two options here. One is we could update that foreign key. The other is we could, in our delete function, we could just explicitly delete the account and the sessions, any sessions that might exist as well. I kind of like to be able to rely on the foreign keys, so let's try updating that. So if we look up here, there's references. It takes this second option here, like so. Okie doke. And kind of the idea, by the way, the distinction between user and account is the user is like a person's, it's their user in the app, right? Whereas account is a person's potential OAuth provider account in a different app. So in this case, I have one user and they have a GitHub account associated with them. If we reconnect here, we can see that again. Account. There's a GitHub provider ID and it's associated with my user ID. Now, in theory, you could have also, say, a Google provider ID associated with the same user ID, where the same user could log in with either GitHub or Google, but they're still the same user, if that makes sense. So there could be one or more accounts associated with a given user. And obviously for session as well, there could be multiple sessions. Anyway, let's now run our migration things. So we updated, did we not save this? Okay, here we go. So we updated this to include those on delete cascade, on update cascade. Now we're going to migration generate. So bun run migration generate. And this creates a new snapshot and then a new migration. Let's see what this is doing. Alter table account, add constraint, foreign key, references, on delete cascade, on update cascade. Okay, so we can see this is first dropping the two constraints that exist, and then it's adding new constraints with the on delete and on update clauses added. So I don't know if it's not possible to edit a constraint. I've never really looked into that, but for whatever reason, this drop and then add should work perfectly fine. And like this is the same as this, and this is the same as this. So this is looking good. We should be able to apply this migration now. Migration run. Bun run migration run. Cool. And now if we refresh here and we look at the structure of account and we look at user ID, foreign key, we can see that it has on delete cascade and on update cascade. And if we do the same with session, bunch of sessions here. Open structure, user ID, on delete cascade, on update cascade. Okie doke, pretty simple. So I'm going to commit the migration changes here as well. Let's get that out of the way. So that's this, this, and this. And we're going to call this update foreign keys for account in the session to cascade delete. And these are the changes. Looks good. Commit. So now every table that references the user has that foreign key set, and we should just be able to delete that user row, and it'll automatically delete all of the data associated with that user as well. This is a bit of an annoying thing to test because I don't really want to delete my own user, but maybe I have no choice. But first I'm going to try exporting the data. Although I'm not really planning on implementing import. So even if I export the data, I'll still need to recreate it all after I delete my own user. Unfortunately, I can't just create a test user either because of the way they're associated with GitHub accounts. You know, I only have one GitHub account that I want to use for this. So I'm just going to have to delete my user and then recreate it. Oh yeah, got to rerun the service here. Okay, so let's just, go ahead and do it here. So click delete. Let's open up the network tab so we can see what's going on. And delete. And so we got a 302. The deletion happened and then it redirected us back to the home page. This is what we like to see. And now if I look at my tables, refresh this here, not structure really, just the actual values. So here we have those two credential provider IDs that were associated with a different user. That's just old data, but the one with the GitHub provider ID is gone. If we look at exercises, there's none. They're all gone. If we look at session, all of the sessions associated with my user are gone as well. I do have these other sessions, but those are associated with different users, presumably. User ID, yeah. QWB YX8. Those are these two test users. And I might actually just delete these two users here in the UI as well, because these are left from before I set up the GitHub auth, and they're just kind of confusing. If I delete these rows, and I believe this is the commit changes button, because we have the foreign key set up, that's also going to delete those sessions and everything else. So very convenient. Okay, so now everything should be empty. No session, no sets, no users, no verifications. It's all gone. My data was deleted. Cool. So now if I sign back in, I should be able to create a new account. And that happened. And if I go manage exercises, I can just create a new exercise here. Edit it. Check these things off for testing purposes. Update. And, as you can see, we're just doing our usual thing. This is interesting. I don't like that those are inconsistent. One is imperial, one is metric. Let me add a next action for that. Mix default units. So they are both either imperial or metric. Another thing is like when creating a new, or when a new user is created, improve onboarding flow. Don't really know exactly what that would look like, but what I noticed is when I created a user, I was immediately put into this today page, despite not actually being able to do anything in this page at all, because I had no exercises created yet. So maybe that should send me to the manage exercises page first, or maybe it should send me to the today page, but include like a little, a little pop-up kind of thing, a little call out where it's like, hey, you haven't created any exercises yet. Go to the manage exercises page to do that. But that's not our focus right now, but just added it to the list. Okay, so we've got our delete functionality. Now we just need to do an export. And the export is a little bit trickier. Let's say in our settings page here, we're going to have another horizontal field. This one is not going to be part of the parent form, and it's going to be export my data. And it's not a danger button. And there's no modal that we need for this because it's not an unsafe action to perform. And when this is clicked, we're actually just going to want to download a file. So I think so we could use like a form submit thing. I might just do it this way for now though. Window.location equals user export. And then that we need to make sure that that URL, that controller method, is returning like an application octet stream or some other MIME type where it's going to cause the browser to trigger a download instead of rendering it. Okay, so let's try doing export. And we see that it just takes us to this 404 as expected. So now let's import that or implement that route. User export. And here, when we're exporting, we can't rely on foreign keys. So we're going to have to implement a bit more complicated of a set of queries. Also, I'm kind of assuming we're going to export this in a JSON structure, something where, it's like an object, and each key in the object is the name of a table. The value is an array, which is all of the rows in that table associated with that object. So there would be like sets and then an array of sets, exercises and an array of exercises. And the export format doesn't necessarily need to conform exactly to the format of the columns in the database, right? We only need to export the data that would be relevant when the user is importing it in another app. So to use an example, like if we look at exercises here, we don't need to include user ID. It would just be ID and name, right? And parameters, I guess. Similarly, like for sets, it's like we don't really need order because that'll be included in the array in the JSON. But maybe we do want to include that. I don't know, actually. And like we're not even going to include session or account at all, or user really. We could have user, but I mean, we could have like preferred units from the user maybe, but the other parts of it are data that we don't really want to export. Okay, so let's see here. I would do something like const user equals await db dot select user table dot where. We're going to be using where clauses like this a lot. It would be like select dot from user data. And I mean, I guess we don't really need to do this because we already have it in the request. So we could just do like preferred units, user.preferred units. Okay. And then exercises is await db.select from exercises where equals exercises table dot ad or dot user, I mean user dot ad, right? And if we look at another place where we're selecting exercises, like up here, get exercises for user. Actually, I'm going to probably implement this as a little helper function in here. So it would be like get exercises for user export, say. And this would be like, we could, so here's what I'm thinking. We could have two functions here where they both implement a SQL query, and then this one includes a select to only select the fields that we care about. Or we could reuse this get exercise for user function here and avoid duplicating that SQL query logic and then filter the resulting rows in this function before returning them. And so it's kind of a question of whether we want to reduce duplication at the cost of selecting some additional rows that are going to be filtered out, or do we want to avoid selecting those rows in the first place at the cost of including a little bit of code duplication? Or we could have something where it's like or export, and then based on whether or not that's set, we would select different values in here. And maybe that's kind of the way to do it. But I kind of like to avoid these Boolean parameters, and I'm not really concerned about the additional cost of selecting a few columns because these aren't big columns, right? We're not talking about like large chunks of binary data that we don't want to select. It's just a few things that we want to filter out. So let's just do it this way, I guess. We would return exercises dot map, and here we're just going to basically pick the values that we actually want to return. So we want the ID, the name, and this has to be in parentheses here. So if you're returning an object directly from a Lambda function like this, or an arrow function, if you don't put parentheses around it, the brackets are treated as a code block, right? So it's the same as defining a function where you have those brackets there to have a block of code inside that function. And so syntactically, it doesn't interpret it as an object literal. So if we want it to be saying return this object literal, you just have to enclose that in parentheses to turn it into an expression instead of a block. Okie doke. So ID, name, and parameters, I think, was what we were going to do. Yep, just like that. And that's going to, return an object of this structure. So the type is inferring that properly. We don't need to define a custom interface for that because it's only going to be used in one place for now. And so we're going to want to do a similar thing for sets. So if we look at sets here, we should have let's actually just copy these over here. A get sets for user function. And this is something that we haven't needed yet because in our pages, we're either getting only the sets for a given exercise for the historical view or all the sets for a given day for the today view. But in this case, we want to get all the sets for a user across all their exercises and all their days, which could be a fairly large chunk of data, right? And in fact, because we're not using that anywhere else, I'm actually just going to do a get sets for user export function. And we're going to do it this way. Sets table. Sets table.user, user ID. Can get rid of that. And we're just going to select the values that we want here. So there's I wonder how this actually works. Let's see here. Copy. Partial select. This is an object, which is interesting. Can I not do an array? I suppose not. Okay, well, we're going to do an object then. So we're going to select the ID is sets table.id. What even is there? Let's take a look at the sets table again. Look at the structure here. So the ID, don't need the user ID. Going to select the exercise ID. Sets table.exercise. Date, sets table.date. Order, I think we will include the order. And parameters, sets table.parameters. And we might as well put an order by clause in here as well, because otherwise we're just going to get these in a kind of a random order. Whereas we probably want to have them ordered by date in order, right? So it would be like sets table dot date and sets table dot order. And this would be, so if we want the earliest dates first, the date would be ascending, right? And the order would also be ascending. Okay, and I see, well, yeah, that's a bit different there. Okay. So now we have our exercises and our sets. What else are we going to want to export? Exercises, sets, the user, and that's pretty much it. When we add new tables, we're going to have to remember to add them to this export functionality though. So actually we're going to have this be await get exercises for user export, user.id, and sets, get sets for user export, user.id. And so then this is going to have like export data equals user data, exercises, sets, something like that. And so now we want to actually return this in the response. So say I do like res.send, just as an example, export data. Let's see what happens here. Refresh the page that we don't really need to, click export, user export, user export. Oh, it's doing a get, and this is a post. So we can call this get. Refresh. Right. So what we can see here is that this is returning, let's take a look at the content type here. Application JSON content type. And because it's application JSON, the browser is rendering it in the actual browser UI. So if somebody clicks this link, they're going to be taken to that page. But this isn't really what we want. We want it to be downloaded. And I believe that that's done with a content disposition header. Let's look at the Express docs for a moment. If we look at the API reference, response, I wonder if send file is going to set content disposition. No, this is actually sending a literal file from your file system, which isn't what we want. We want to send the body. So one thing we could do is do like res.set header, content type, application octet stream. Curious to see what this does. So now if I click export, it still takes me here. Did it set the value properly? Content response header, content length 0. What? Also, why is it returning? Oh, 304 not modified, right? Okay. Let's look up the content disposition, because I think that's the normal way to do this. Content disposition indicates whether the content should be displayed inline or downloaded as an attachment. We want it to be downloaded as an attachment. So it would be something like this. Oh, and you can specify file name and encoding. Interesting. Okay, so we're going to want to do something like this. We don't really, I think that's the encoding of the file name itself, which is not something that we're concerned with. So let's do this, disposition. And this is going to be attachment, file name equals something. And what that something is, it's going to be something.json. And we're probably going to want to have it be the user underscore, or like this, user underscore, and then the user ID. Like that. Let's see what it does now. Click export, and it downloaded that file. So the nice thing about that is, even though it's being opened in the browser, it's not actually redirecting, or it's not actually opening that page in the user's like display window here. It's just downloading it. So we don't need to use like any special AJAX or anything like that. And if the user clicks it again, it's going to download it again, but it's going to put the 1 on it or whatever based on however your browser handles downloading duplicate file names. We could also add a timestamp to that maybe, like just a date.now. So now if I click export, it's going to export it with the timestamp as well. Okie doke. So now we have our export functionality. Let's commit these things. So we're adding export and delete. And let's actually try and split these out into 2 commits, even though we kind of have all of the code in there at once. If we stage the ranges individually here, we can, add that export. And this is used for export. This is used for export. And if we go over here, this part's used for export. We can stage these blocks. Stage that block too. And stage that block too. I don't really know. I didn't stage all those more cleanly, but whatever. And then we can also stage this user export piece. And so now we have, those updated imports, the export route, exercises, sets, and this little chunk of code here, add user data export. And then the remainder we can do add user data delete. Cool. Let's go back to our notes page for a moment here. Notes. So now this can be done. Okay. So now we're kind of at the point of, getting into doing some of those improvements, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Actually, one of the improvements that I wanted to do today is something more back-end side, which is adding validation to our parameters. And so for that, I'm going to install a schema validation library called Zod. And that should add it to my package.json. Zod is a nice one because it's TypeScript native, basically. It has the ability to use a TypeScript type to infer the type of a schema, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but basically it's like if you define a schema, you don't have to define another interface for that in TypeScript. You can just refer to that schema using a special TypeScript generic. Okay, and then here, this is going to be called add Zod. I like to commit these, adding a new library things kind of as an independent unit usually. And then now we can start using it. So let's actually open the Zod docs here. Zod. Talk about it a little bit. The idea with Zod is you can define a schema that declares the structure of an object, or, the structure of any value, I should say. It doesn't have to be an object. And then you can use that schema with the various Zod functions to validate an object or to coerce it into that structure. It can do like typecasting. Like if there's like a string, you can typecast that into a number as part of parsing the object. And so let's look at basic usage here. So we kind of have this idea of either doing a parse or a safe parse. And I think we kind of want to do a parse for now. And the thing about the parse is it's going to throw an error. And that might sound like something that we don't want, because what we actually want is to return a express response error code. And throwing an error is not necessarily going to return the exact error code that we want. But I want to actually add a helper function around these controller methods that's going to handle catching those errors and converting them into an appropriate error response anyway. So we're going to rely on the fact that that's going to be done and just have the Zod validation throw an error for now. Okay, so let's find a route that we want to validate here. Pretty much anything where there's like a query, we're going to want to do it. Anything where there's params. So thinking about it, I'm actually going to define a quick helper function. And I'll probably move this to another place, but for now I'm just going to put it right here. Export function, validate request. And then we're going to have params schema, query schema, and body schema. And this is going to return void. Basically, if the function doesn't throw an error, then the stuff is valid. I guess, though, thinking about it, it should return something else. We're going to want this to return, let's call it validated body, because we do want to be able to support that typecasting that I talked about. Thinking about this as parsing those values into the shape that we expect. We want to return that parsed value. And the reason I'm exporting these for now is because I'm going to be moving them to another file. Validated body. And so this is going to return, or sorry, I should call this validated request. Params would be, I guess, an array of strings. And maybe we'll adjust these later. Query. The query type is complicated because the express query type is this mess. Query string.parsedQs. And if you actually look at that, it's got a lot of potential complexity in there. But because we don't have any use cases for having multiple values defined for a single query parameter, basically the reason it's complicated for Express is because it's like you can do something like foo equals 1 and foo equals 2, and now you've got like an array of values for foo. And there's some other things that you can do as well. But for now, we only are expecting each query thing to be like in a single value. So this would be like a record string for now. And then body. Let's just do this any for now. We're going to need to refine these types a little bit, but I'm not quite worried about that at the moment. We'll be able to use the Zod schema validation to refine them, I believe. So param schema is going to be a, what is the type here? Let's just do a quick example here. So if we go up here, we do import Z from Zod. Z is like the shorthand helper function thing for building schemas. So like we would say params schema equals Z dot object, where there's, for like in this case down here, date is a param, so it would be like date is a string. And really we would say like this is either today or a string that matches this certain regex, but for now we're just going to say it's a string. And this is also reminding me that this params should be an object as well. And so what type is this param schema? It's a z.zod object. But I feel like I want to do like z.schema. Which is sort of like a more generic type. And so now let's see what happens here if we do something like return params as params schema dot parse. Oh yeah, and then this needs the actual request as well. Which we're just going to call request. We're not going to include the guaranteed session because that's not going to be parsed out of this to begin with. It's only doing the actual things that exist in Express already. So we can just use the default Express type here. And so this is parsing request.params. And then we do the same thing for query, parsing request.query. And body, parsing request.body. And the other thing is we're going to want these to be potentially optional. So actually I'm going to put this request first. And then these are going to all three be optional values. And this is query and this is body schema. So here we would do like param schema. If there is something, then parse it, otherwise return undefined. Same thing here. If there is something, parse it, otherwise undefined. And same thing here. If there is something, parse it, otherwise undefined. Okay. And so this is returning this validated request. If I actually get rid of that, I want to see what the type of inference has for me here. It's just any. So I feel like there's something fancy we can do here with a generic. I want to see if I can make this work. So if we say like t params, t query, t body, and then this is z.schema t params. Let's see what this is returning now. T params are undefined. Yeah, that's kind of what I want to see. T query, T body. And maybe we don't need this validated request thing. We definitely don't need that because I just put that as an example. And let's see what happens when we use this. So here we would do like const query and params. This one doesn't have a body, so we don't need to destructure that, equals validate request, and then the params is z.object date z.string for now. We can make that more refined in a moment. The query is z.object editing set again, z.string. And the body is not specified because there is no body for these. Let's run the server here. And I'm going to do console.log parsed query and params. And if we look at the type of these, we can see that it's inferred the type of the query and the type of the params based on the type of these schemas. So if I'm down here, I could do like query dot, and I can see that it's, dot editing set. So we get fully typed values, which is very nice. So this is the today page. Let's go check out that page. If I go today, what's up here? Oh, so see, this is complaining now because editing set isn't specified. This needs to be optional. And now it will work. So, in the console log here, we can say that we can see that the query has nothing and the params has the date. And if I do actually that editing set thing, that's not even used anymore, is it? Like if we look, it's being passed into the view. But now that we've kind of Ajaxified our view, I don't think that editing set value is used at all yet. So we can actually totally get rid of the need for that at all, which is nice. Let's get rid of editing set. That was used back when there was the sets were read-only and then you would click on it to edit it. But now you don't need to do that. They're just editable automatically. And then I can get rid of this. Anything else around editing set? Just this. Okie doke. So now we also don't need that. And then this is today would just be params.date and params.date and params.date. Yeah, okay. And kind of the reason this is throwing an error now is because this params is possibly undefined, right? And kind of the idea here is here we have this blank or undefined business. And so the response type from this validated request is params type or undefined. And there's probably a way to fix that. Because in theory, we should know as long as the parameter is specified, this value will never be undefined. I wonder, so now we're seeing, oh yeah, right, that would be the other way around. So now what's the response type of this? Params, still or undefined. I'm trying to get the TypeScript engine to basically recognize the inference here, that when params is passed in, when the value of the params type or param schema type is not undefined, then the value of the params return value will never be undefined either. But I'm not sure the best way to do that. And we could say, for instance, return an empty object here, but we're still going to get errors because it's, it could be an empty object. So we don't know that date is present on it. we can work around this issue by putting these exclamation points. And as much as I'm not a huge fan of that, because I would rather the types actually knew what was going on, I'm just going to leave it at that for now. Move on. So we can kind of adjust that later if we want to start digging more into the TypeScript types. The other option is these could actually be required. Maybe something to consider. If I make those required, what does this look like? So now we don't need the exclamation points, but we do have this problem where these other two values need to be like I could do z.undefined, z.undefined. And so now it knows that the response value here has got params, which is this object, and then like query is undefined, which is kind of interesting. Let's see what happens now. We get an error. Expected undefined, received object. So like for instance, this query thing, if I did z.object instead with an empty object, now does it work? No, if I do the same thing down here, kind of just curious to, yeah, so that does work. But really, these should be maybe more like z.any. Is there an unknown? Kind of like that, actually. z.unknown. Basically saying we don't care what those values are. They could be anything. But as like with any, it's like something can take on any value. With unknown, it's more like you're asserting that it's not any value. So like if I then do query here, if I can type, so the type of query, gosh, okay. So the type of query here is unknown. So this, is going to need to be casted to another type in order to use it at all, which is fine because we're not going to use it. So this seems to work okay. And I could even pass this in as a default value for these, like z.unknown. And then I need to do the same thing down here. What are you complaining about? I don't know. I don't like that error. Let's just not do that. What if I make these optional and I do like or z.unknown? Let's use null coalescing. How does that work? And do the same things for these, query schema and body schema. And then we should be able, so now it's complaining because params is of type unknown. So the response here yeah, it's not liking that. Okay. We'll just, keep a little bit of this boilerplate, I guess. Get rid of that, get rid of that, that. Make these all required, like we have it here. And we'll just need to specify those each time we call validate request. Gets us good typing, so that's fine with me. And so now we're going to want to continue to use this in all of our other routes as well. So like here where we're parsing request.body, we're actually going to use an object schema to do that instead. exercise is a z.string. Date is a z.string. And order is probably also a string. And like, here's a case where, well, I kind of like to keep these types simple, and then we can add more refinements on them. And so then this would be like body like that. And then these can go away. And so this is saying, yeah, it's destructuring the body here. And so now we know that, say, like exercise ID is a string. User, what are you complaining about? User does not exist in type. Seems like it should exist. I feel like I've seen this error before. What was causing it then? I don't know. Let's see. Was that like that before I did this change? It seems like it shouldn't be relevant. See, now it's happy. So I think that there's actually something else going on here, where the exercise ID here is a string. And down here, because it knows that's a string, it's complaining because it should be a number. And for some reason, that error is showing up on the user thing. If I do this, what happens? Now it's complaining about order, probably for the same reason. Order. And now it works. So that's fine. But one of the nice things about Zod is we can actually do that in this parsing step. And I don't remember how to do that. Let's have to look at the docs here. So there's like number. There's transform. But this is kind of, so we could do like transform parse int, right? But there's probably a better way to do that. If we look at string, let's just do a quick Google search. Zod convert string to number. So this is an issue. Well, let's just try it. So if we do dot transform number, getting a weird error here. Well, first of all, I shouldn't be putting that on date to begin with. That should be on order, for example. And the error is very confusing. What if I do like that was there like a pre-process thing? Don't know. Okay, well, let's just leave this as string for now then, and we can do the parsing outside of Zod. I feel like there's probably something up with our types here where maybe this should be like kind of the problem is we have a different type for our input and our output here. But I don't really know exactly how to define that in a way that's not going to, I don't know, cause other problems. Like, because I don't know what this middle parameter should be for one thing. If I look at this, like the query schema or the param schema, what's that one? I can't tell. I don't think this is really gonna show it to me because it's cutting it off here. Let's try this. So the type of test is Zod object. The first generic value is that. Then strip, whatever that is, then Zod type any. Then there's two more generic values. What if I do .transform number? So now test has, well, it's cutting it off, but you can see like the first one, the order is this Zod effect. Yeah, I don't know. Let's just not worry about that for now. It's getting a little bit too TypeScript soup for me at the moment. But what we can do is refine these to be like, more concrete, more specific string values. So let's go back to the string thing here. Strings. And so, like for instance, we could say that order is a string, and we can refine that to say that it has to match this regex, which is like 0 to 9 plus. In other words, it has to be numbers only. And I don't know if we need to do this, but we could do like a caret at the beginning and a dollar at the end to say that the whole string has to match that. For exercise, same thing. It's a number. And then for date, so the thing about date is we could use like our date parsing thing, but we actually have a specific format for our dates. Like if we look at this is the post sets page. If we look at the today page where we're doing that post, the date is this date value. And that date value is using this date string thing. So it's the output of this toDate string function, which is like this very specific format. So for now, I'm going to, instead of just allowing any format, I'm going to actually say that like this, for instance, has to be, I think if I do .or, and then I could do like z.enum today, or z.regex. I see. Let's do string.regex. And then this would be like 0 to 9, 4. Let's end that so we stop getting the squigglies. And then dash 0 to 9, 2. And then dash 0 to 9, 2 again. Right? Something like that. And that's kind of similar to this. I guess we could use the /d thing. Might as well do that. So like /d. Okie doke. And here, like this dot string goes away. Right? It would be like z.or either. Okay, well, I don't really know. Let's just do this and then get rid of the .or and just use the regex and do like today or that. And then here have the up caret and the $sign at the end and get rid of that unneeded parentheses. Okay. Okie doke. So here we're saying, this parameter has to be a string, and then that has to be either today or this value. And in this case, because we have that same regex up here, this is a little bit redundant, but we still want to get into the habit of validating our values with Zod, not relying on express, just in case. And so this same date regex, let's copy this whole regex for the moment. We're going to do down here as well. .regex. And without the today part. And I might as well do /d for these as well. Okay. So let's test that out. That's what happens when we're creating a new set here. And I mean, I'm thinking about this now, and I'm like, with the way we have the UI now, though, when we're adding a new set, I don't know if these will even ever be specified. Order will. Date will. Yeah, they will. They will. Okay, okay. So let's try adding a new one here. Everything. And it works, which is good. So that's calling that should be yeah. Oh, but then it redirects. We don't need that. Why did it redirect? Or what even happened there? Oh, right, right. I think we do that on purpose. But anyway, that's fine. We can see that it works. Okie doke. So let's continue with our validation spree here. So here we're going to body has an exercise ID, but no date or order, just the ID. And params has an ID. And that is where is that used? That is a number again. So this would be something like this. A numeric string. And so here we would say const body is that and const params ID, like so. And then we can get rid of this as well. And now our inputs are all validated. And so one of the things here, like this is dynamically accessing the body. Okay, we need to parse into exercise ID down here as well. We should have been doing this before. So this is kind of catching some of these type bugs that they didn't really matter, but there's an incompatibility with the types. But once it gets to Postgres, it doesn't care. But, Zod or Drizzle or ORM was kind of allowing that, even though it wasn't the right type because it didn't know exactly what type it should be. Anyway, so the other thing is where we have this rec.body, right? I think that's the only use case in this file, or in this controller method, I mean. But we're accessing it dynamically here. So we also need a I wonder if there's a way to do like the rest of it. I think there is, right? It's like that, maybe? Yeah. So now this would be that. But the problem is that the type here is unknown. And so what do we expect to be in the body? It's going to have a exercise ID. It's not going to have a date or an order. And then it's also going to have parameter values, which looks like is just like a string, basically. And I think we could do... I think there's like a record concept in Zod. So like this could be like dot extend z dot record. And here the value type is z dot enum. Oops, enum. Let's just do an empty array there. And then the key type, I mean. And then the value type is z dot string, say. Is this going to work? No. Dot and is that going to work? So what's the type of body now? It's using that, and I don't know. That might work. And then this is going to be all parameters dot map p dot id. So what are you complaining about now? Not entirely sure. I wonder if there's a better way to do this. Like if we take this object, I mean, we could manually define all the parameters in here, but that's kind of what I'm trying to avoid, if possible. So like if I do this, dot reduce, and then we would have the memo parameter return and then this needs a default value in the reduce of an object. And then we get rid of the and altogether. I mean, what's it going to think that looks like? So now body, it doesn't even know what to expect. I wonder what the type of this is. An empty object. Okay, so like say we look at this all parameters array here. I feel like there's some kind of weird thing you can do to tell TypeScript to like evaluate the type at compile time. But I don't really know how to do that. And again, I'm not going to worry about it too much. If this doesn't work perfectly, we're just going to brute force it for now, because we know that the actual validation of the schema is going to be good. And we can even put, like, let's put a console.log schema that to make sure that that is working properly. And so this is going to happen when we update one of these exercises. Let's try that and see what we get logged here. Gosh, a lot of scrolling to do. What is this? Oh, it's got these like big Zod string things that are being expanded because this is like a function with a bunch of methods on it. But we can see like the duration, this is the key for duration. Probably the other ones are all going to be the same. If we scroll up a little bit more, there's like distance. So this is working as expected, it looks like. Okie doke. So we've got that validation here as well. And all of these, exactly what's in that string is hard to say. So we're just going to call it a string. It could be any string value. And, in theory, you could have something where it's like in your all parameters, each of these parameters could define like a schema, or you could even define a schema based on the data type, where it's like for the number data type, it's expected to look like this. And maybe we'll add that later. But for now, just calling it a string seems fine. Okie doke. And then for this delete one here, it's going to be something kind of similar, but without the whole body. So a lot simpler. This one is just z.unknown. And the body goes away. And this goes away so we don't have the duplicate declaration. Okie doke. And this one doesn't need anything. There's a question whether we want to just call validate request on with 3 z.unknowns, like even if we don't actually intend to parse any of those values out. I don't feel like that's necessary. If that validate request was also validating other things, then maybe that would be useful, but we don't really need to do that. So let's skip it. Then down here we have this one where there's rec.body.name. And again, here we can see kind of some of the value where it's like z.object name z.string. We can get rid of this rec.body.name check. And this one, it has no parameters. So this is just z.unknown again. And the body has a name. And this is a lot more declarative than what we had before. And, we want to make sure to use that name down here as well. So we can just do it like that. And one of the things about this too is like this name, maybe we feel like we don't want to let somebody do like a super long name. So maybe I could do like max 64 to say, hey, like if we look at the Zod string thing, you can do like max 5 to basically say that it can't be longer than that. And that prevents somebody from making like a, we don't really care in the UI side because it's just going to maybe look a bit ugly if there's a really long name. And 64 is long enough that it's certainly going to be ugly anyway. But what this protects us from is somebody making a name that's like a gigabyte long, right? We don't want to allow that. There has to be some kind of reasonable limit. And I should probably be adding that to all of the strings, actually, now that I think about it. Okie doke. At least all of the strings where the value is going to be saved into the database, I should say. So then down here, we've just got a parameter, which is an ID. And this ID, this is an exercise ID. I'm just going to go up here and copy this numeric thing. And this would be params ID. And then here, we're going to just parse it out here. Parse it into an int. And again, we'd like to be able to do that in Zod, but we can't because of the types. But in theory, we could fix that at some point. Then down here, we've got kind of some more interesting parsing to do. So here, ID, again, request.params.id. And then here we would do parse int ID 10. And we also need to do that down here, which, I don't know. I guess it's not great to have to parse it multiple times. Oh, that's not even a function, or it's not an object. But it's not really that big of a deal either. So I'm just going to leave it as is for now. And so then here we also have this query.lookback. So for the query, that's going to be an object. And that's going to have a lookback property. And that's going to be let's say z.string.regex. It's going to be either all. So let's do all, or a series of digits. There we go. And that's also going to be optional. And so then here we have params, and then we also have query. And we might as well just parse out the lookback value like that. Actually, let's leave it just with query, and then this would be like, because we don't want to have to mess with variable naming too much. Okay. So now lookback is either a number or it's a string all. And like we could do params just like that, and we could say like const id equals parse int params.id 10. And then use that ID value down here and over here to avoid having to parse it twice. Not a big deal, but might as well. Okay. And then for this post here, let's see what this is going to have. So there's a, once again, just kind of copy what we've got going on here. And here, params, kind of using a similar pattern, we can get rid of that. And then this has no query, but it does have a body. And this body has a name. And then it also has some of these parameters. So this is kind of the same thing that we had up here, where we need to get the schema for all of the parameters. Kind of makes me think I actually might put this into a helper function. So if I call this like all parameters input schema, and then I could export that from here. Export const all parameters input schema equals this. And z add import from Zod. So now we can reuse that here. And we can reuse that down below, because I feel like this is a kind of annoying thing to have to retype in different places. Where even were we? We were here. Yeah, so there's name, z.string dot max 64. And then there's all parameters input schema. Right? And like if we look at the one up here, okay, so that's not actually right though, because this is not an input schema, it's just I'm still going to leave that here. Actually, I'm going to make a new file called schema or validation.ts. And I'm going to put some of these things in here just to keep it a little more organized. And I'm also going to put in, for instance, like this, const name schema. Got to import Zod, import all parameters. And we can kind of define some reusable schemas in here. It's one of the nice things about Zod. It's really easy to define reusable schemas. Okay, let's get rid of this now. And we can get rid of this here too. And, this would be like name schema. And we also have a place up here where we could do the same thing, name schema. And then, so the other thing is with this down here, wherever we were, the difference here is that we're not actually assigning values to these. We're just setting them to on. But I think that will actually work for the same schema, kind of confusingly. But once we actually like improve that schema type, it's not going to work for that anymore. So I'm going to do just another thing here. Export const, all parameters, declaration schema. And this is going to be z.enum on. Okay. And I might also take this and I might make like a numeric schema here. Export const numeric string schema equals that. And then find all of the instances of that and replace it with numeric string schema. And import that. And similarly with date schema, I'm going to do export const date schema. There's that. And then date schema. And if I look for .regex, this one's interesting because it's not really the same as a date schema. So I guess I'll just leave that for now. Could be improved, doesn't really matter too much. Let's get back to what we were doing. So down here, declaration schema. So with this now, we have a body. And that has, let's just use body. And so here this would be like, actually we can get rid of that check altogether. This would be body. And again, like we're getting this error here because this, whatever this object is, it's not known at runtime unless we update our types or something so that it becomes known. But in the meantime, we would just need to add like this body as any type of thing to basically assert that it should have these parameters. Kind of awkward, but it's okay. And like this is for updating an exercise. So let's try that too and make sure that that works. So if we go to settings page or manage exercises page, actually, what's the problem now? Oh, my imports need to be updated. Got a broken import. And then now I should actually have those, yeah, got to fix this import as well. And now refresh. What's the problem now? I don't know, doesn't seem like there's a problem. Okay, so now if I edit this to say remove distance, update. So the problem here, I guess, is that reps on, wait on, assisted on. What is the problem here? The problem here is that these need to be optional. And these up here should also be optional. Okay. So now if I remove assisted, update, refresh, it's removed. I can add them back on. let's try removing reps, update, go to the today page. The reps number is gone. I can do that stuff. It works fine. Looks like things are working okay. Okay. So deleting, or wait, we already did that one. Dunkity dunk. So this is the one we were just on. This exercise, I guess that's unused, so we don't need to store that in a variable. This deleting down here is going to be something like this. Dunk. Get rid of that. And there's no body either. Oops. Unknown. Okie doke. Settings page, this one doesn't have any parameters at all, so we can skip that. Post to the settings page, this one has some parameters. And so here the parameters are in the body. I mean, it doesn't have any literal parameters, so that can be unknown. And here we have body, preferred units. Let's just do it like that. And then this would be preferred units.weight and preferred units.distance. So preferred units is itself an object. And that has a weight value and a distance value. And these can take on IDs of the supported units. So we're going to want to do something kind of similar to here. If I do like export const all units schema, this would be like all units. And if we look at the all units function, we can see it's returning an array with each of these has an ID. It's this ID that we're going to want to use as the key, and then the value, or this is actually, let's call this enum. All units dot map u.id, and we could put this in a enum for now. Oh, and yeah, don't need to, like so. What are you complaining about? As string. What are you complaining about? I think it's complaining because it's like, there's the possibility of it being an empty array. Whereas with this type, it's like asserting that there has to be at least one string in there or something like that. But we're just going to do as here. Again, if we could get this return value of this all units function to actually be static, because it's I don't know, I keep feeling like I remember there's a way to do that. It's like, declaring it as like read-only const or something. TypeScript read-only const. No, this is not what I want though. Maybe it's like as const. Is that it? So now the type of, yeah. That's what I want. As const. We can put that in all of these hard-coded returning value things. So now, I don't think I need this as anymore. I guess I still do. but we can see that the type is different. It knows that it's one of those values, but it's not, for some reason, happy with that. So I'm just going to do that again. I do wonder, though, now, if I look at one of these things here, do I need that as any? Yes. What if I do this as const? Does that? It's not happy with that. Okay, fine. Okie doke. So settings page. So this is going to be although now that I'm looking at this, because it's weight and distance specifically, we kind of want this to be like all weight units. Dot filter u dot type equals weight dot map. Kind of complicated. All distance units schema. But the advantage of doing it this way is if we do add another weight or units or another weight or distance unit, we don't have to remember to update our schemas at all. They're just going to work with the new values. So this is all weight unit schema and all distance unit schema. This is kind of like trying to keep it dry, right? We're trying to avoid having to define a bunch of these, like all of the IDs of the weight, all of the IDs of the distance units in different places. Let's see here. Okay. Just had to ban somebody real fast. Got a spammer in the chat. Okay. Anyway, so we've got that. And then those are assigned down here. Now, really, because we've got this here, if we look at the Zod object thing, I believe that by default, if there's something in the object that's not listed, yeah, it strips out unrecognized keys. We could use strict to throw an error on the unrecognized keys, but that doesn't really matter at the moment. But what we do know is we don't need this anymore to be explicitly declaring exactly which keys, because the Zod schema is already doing that. So we can just set preferred units, and it's only going to be weight or distance. So there's no way for a user to like set some third key in there that doesn't make sense anymore. What's going on with this? How do I get rid of that little window? Okay, cool. Okie doke. Seems good. And then deleting a user and exporting a user, these are not things that have any parameters, so we don't need to add anything there. So we kind of went through that whole process now, sort of a tedious process of adding this validate request in every single one of these functions. Also, I'm going to take this out of here, get rid of this, and it's going to go into the validation.ts file, of course. And then over here, we're going to need to import that. Okay. And what's it? Over here, we're going to need to import request from Express. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was kind of a pain, but that's all right. So now there's kind of this other thing that I talked about where I sort of want to add a function for constructing a controller method that's going to catch errors. Because, okay, say I'm over here and, I set this. Well, let's think of a good example. So say I'm doing manage exercises and I look at the historical thing and then I have this be something that's not a number. It's just going to spin because what's happened is the controller method has thrown an error that should be a number, but it's not. And really, I should add probably a message on here like should be any number. Fine. Fine. So now if I do that again, we get an error saying invalid string should be a number. But that's not returned to the user in any way. Instead, it just doesn't return anything at all, and the browser times out because the Express controller is never sending a response. So we could use try parse here, or parse safe or whatever, and pass in a response and have this handle returning that response. But I feel like a better way to do that is to actually define a function to help with that. So let's make I guess we could put it in util. And we could call it something like controller method. And this is going to accept let's do export function. A function. And that's going to be, let's call it controller. And let's just say any for now. And then that's actually going to return another function that's going to accept a request. And that is going to be imported from Express, and a response also imported from Express. And it's going to call the controller with the request and response. Just to start with, let's do that. And so it's not really doing anything yet. But so now if I take like this method here, I do controller method, and I import that. It's now wrapping that method and it's going to call it. So if I go back here, if I sign out, it's still rendering the page, but it's doing it with this controller method, wrapping the interior, right? And so let's sign back in here. We're kind of going to need to add that to every single one of these. Controller method, controller method, and I'll kind of illustrate why I'm doing that once we do this on every route. controller method, controller method, controller method, controller method. Kind of ended up with a lot of routes in here, haven't we? Controller method, controller method. Almost there. Okay. So now what we can do here is we can actually put this in a try catch. And like this function here, we can make this an async function as well. So we can actually catch promise exceptions as well. And then we can do try controller. And we could even do await controller. And catch error. Res, I guess, dot send. Dot status. Let's just do a 400 for now. Dot send error. So now, if I do that same thing I did before, or I put an ASDF in here, the user is actually going to get that error response. And, you know, there's a lot of complexity around like handling these errors effectively. One kind of thing I could do here is like if instance of E, or if E instance of Zod error, we could do like a special case here where we do return resp.status 400 dot send E dot toString. Curious to see what that's going to return. So we get that error returned. But if the error is like something else, like a SQL error that maybe we don't want to expose to the user, they're just going to get this unknown error response. And we could set that as a 500. So we could make this error handling a fair bit more complicated here. The nice thing about this as well is like, you know, suppose we have this. Now, suppose if I open Podman here and stop my database, this one, stop, and I refresh the page. Oh, actually, it's not going to work with that because there's the login issue. Like getting the user session is still not working. So not the best example. But suppose, like this is exercise 21. Suppose I pick an exercise that doesn't exist. Not found, huh? Do we have a code path for that specifically? I think we do. Yeah, let's get rid of that for a moment. Try it again. We get that unknown error happening. So we can kind of control a little bit better what error our users are getting back. And, you know, maybe we also want to console.log unknown error E. Make that console.error, I guess. Okay, so anyway, We are pretty much at time here. So let's commit this stuff. So what have we done? We've added validation to basically every single route, which was kind of tedious. We've added this controller method to allow us to catch errors and actually return appropriate responses for them, more or less. And really, there's a lot, like I said, a lot of complexity around error responses. Like one thing is we could throw errors with a status code property that could then change what status code is returned. For routes that are called via AJAX, we could return our errors in a standard format so that those could be displayed in like a little toast. But I'm not going to do any of that right now because we just don't have time. Okay. And then we declare those as const, which is just helping our types a little bit. And then we're going to call this add validation and error handling to all controllers. Add input, let's say input validation. Okay, commit that. Do I have, let's see, I feel like I might have left a console.log in there somewhere. Console.log. Yeah, I was worried about that. Well, that's actually from an earlier day. We don't need that. Remove unused console.log. Okay, let's push our changes. And that's going to be it for today. Thanks, y'all. See you later.